the work itself is much more, it's much deeper than you imagine, but not in the sense of it being deeper and mysterious. The work I find to be very very practical approach. And what you're looking for, talk to a teacher, qualify your teacher, have a conversation with them, ask your questions, see if they can answer, they can create a situation where you feel like you're getting your questions answered. To me, that's an important quality. The teacher brings a certain consistency, of course. Mm-hmm. That's without a question. I've been doing it for 20 years. You've been teaching, I don't know how many years you've been teaching, right? The student also has to bring consistency. Mm-hmm. And this is very important. In the beginning, most students they're wanting to choose the right teacher.
Hey friends, it's Irene Line here, and welcome to this long-form interview with my good friend and colleague, my Feldenkrais colleague, I should stipulate, Andrew Gibbons. That short clip you just saw or heard, depending on where you're listening or watching this, is from our talk. And if you haven't seen much of the work that I do that involves the Feldenkrais method and how I like to call it Feldenkraisian learning, that's okay. It's actually infused within all of my online programs and within my in-person movement workshops that I do. One is called Up and Down. I co-teach that with Elia Marak. Now, I wanted to bring Andrew on because he is a wealth of knowledge. He is very skilled in this work. He's funny. He's got great stories. We get into the origin story of how he got into this work when he was a young man and how this helped him with some of his injuries as a result of being highly into piano. And we get into just the basics of Feldenkraisian learning and how brilliant it really is. This was the work that helped me recover from some pretty serious knee injuries in my mid-20s. It is still my daily practice, by the way. So even though I'm not speaking about this a lot, it still infuses within my life all the time. Of course, it takes time to show and tell and teach everything that is within my suite of skills and tools. So here is a start of bringing more information to you about this very sophisticated form of neuroplastic learning and healing. Enjoy.
Tell me your first experience with the work that we're talking about, with the Feldenkrais work, with Moshe's work.
Sure.
Where were you? Were you in a class? Were you by yourself?
I was away from home for the first time.
How old were you?
I was 16. I was away at the Tanglewood Music Festival. I was in the high school division. And I was away from home really for the first time for a month there to participate in the piano program that they had.
Got it.
Boston University runs an institute for young pianists there. And so I was away from home for the first time. I was surrounded by a quality of musicianship that I had no idea existed. I was one of those people that really didn't know what they were getting into.
Uh-huh.
They tell you in the beginning, like everybody thinks that why are they here? But I really felt like a fish out of water. And it was an incredible time. It was a complete change of environment for me. And then it was just like being thrown into the deep end of the pool. The first guy that played in the daily masterclass we had played the Stravinsky Petrushka piano arrangement, which if you've never heard it, you should look it up, because I was sitting 5 feet away and my only thought was, wow, and I have clearly walked into the wrong classroom.
Had you heard it before?
No. When I say that I felt like a fish out of water, I really had no knowledge of the meatier high-level piano repertoire. I think I was just a musical kid who had some talent that hadn't really been developed. I had very, very poor technique, but I was musical. Mm-hmm. And, when I reflect on it, I think I was probably chosen. I was probably a little bit of pepper, they thought, well, we'll throw this guy. This guy will be an interesting choice.
Yeah.
because I was easily the worst pianist in the group.
Oh
And
no.
that's not a like, oh, woe is me. It there's
That's
no other way.
accurate.
There's no other way to describe it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it was a summer where I was faced with one of those kind of moments in your life where you're either going to just crater. I mean, it was like, I mean, when I say that my only thought was I've walked into the wrong room.
Yeah.
When he finished and there was a restroom break, right?
Yeah.
I got up and walked down to the hall to the administration office, and I said, I've been in the wrong room. I need to go to the whatever that tier 1 is. I need to be in tier 3 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they assured me, no, you're fine.
Oh.
And it was just one of those moments where you had to sort of decide, oh my God, what if they find out about it? Because eventually, of course, I played in front of the group.
Right.
So it was just, it was an amazing experience to survive that, first of all, psychologically.
Yes.
Because you just had to kind of choose at that point, well, since there's nowhere to go but up.
Why not?
And in the end, it was kind of an enviable position because everything to me was new. I had never heard Schumann. I had never heard Brahms. I had heard Mozart and Beethoven, but I hadn't paid much attention.
Right.
And here, you know, a kid comes and sits down at the piano and plays the entire Liszt B minor sonata from memory, which is about 40 minutes of music. And so there's just a part of you that could freak out about that.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, I just had to admit my situation and realize I'm in a really amazing position to learn. And that's what I did. And after a month, I begged my parents to stay for another month. And they said okay. And the administration said, I'm sorry, we filled all the slots for the next month, the next group that comes in, but you can take a listening and analysis seminar, which was like not as performance heavy and more studying compositions and repertoire. So, and that was great. It gave me a lot more time. I got to listen to a lot more recordings. I got to sit in a lot of rehearsals of the Boston Symphony and soloists that came in, and that was just incredible. And that was the summer that I discovered Feldenkrais. Anat Banyel was at that time working there. I don't know for how long, but she was there working with members of the symphony, and she came and taught a workshop for the high school students.
Right. And
I had no idea what it was. I had a friend of mine who was a tenor, and you know, all the singers. This was the thing. All my friends were singers because singers are kind of fun. They're gregarious. Yeah. Also, they don't have to practice the long hours because you can hurt your throat.
Yep.
The pianists are all locked away for 5 and 6 hours, and the string players and
they weren't as fun, hey?
Yeah, the singers. It was really kind of cool. As I hung out with them more, their day-to-day routine included a lot of extra stuff. Like they all took a yoga class, they took a meditation class, they took a stage presence class. And these were all sort of like other skills, but as a performer, I was like, it'd be nice to know about some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And at some point, one of the singers said to me, it was my closest friend at the time, and we're still friends today. He said, you know, there's this posture workshop. I think it's about posture.
Yeah, sure.
I forget I don't know what they titled. I don't know if they said it's going to be a Feldenkrais workshop, and he said, let's go. And I said, okay, cool. So we went, and you know, she talked a little bit, and then the group did, I think, 1 or 2 awareness through movement lessons. Mm-hmm. And I was miserable. It was side sitting on the floor. I was not comfortable. I wasn't in agony, but it was, you know, you're moving quite slowly and you're, you know, having to pay attention. And I was an athletic kid, but after I discovered music, my physical abilities I just sat on a piano bench a lot. So, but the thing I noticed in the lesson was that it worked.
How did it work?
It worked because there was no BS. There was no woo to it. No woo-woo. She just asked straightforward, concrete questions. She asked us to compare doing it this way, doing it that way, turning your spine when you lift the hip versus when you lower the hip. It was very, very practical. Mm-hmm. And there was also, of course, time built into the experience for you to really measure what you were doing. Mm. And this I think is really the secret ingredient, of course, because if you pay attention, you find out that you can learn, that your attentional, the payment, your investment of attention, at least for me, it was actually quite easy to figure out which way worked better, and to then revise and sort of edit as you went.
Right.
And that the whole experience, once you could kind of see it, it took me a long time to, of course, maybe see it this way, but you were really learning to refine what you did. And it was very different from any exercise experience I had had, sure. And of course, by that time, my experience with the piano had shown me that, you know, your physical skills are fairly mysterious to you. You can practice.
How do you mean? Explain that.
Well, you can practice as much as you want.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a certain kind of a story for a certain kind of a person.
Sure.
I was not a naturally gifted, I was not a prodigy. So you can put a lot of hours in, and sometimes it leads somewhere and sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
And it's a frustrating experience. And the thing that, of course, pulls you through is hopefully either your desire for what you're going for, the piece you're trying to learn, or the kind of music you want to play, or the way you want to sound, or just your own determination.
Your will.
Yeah, your will,
yeah.
Which is an important part of it.
It is.
But by that point in my life, I had a fair amount of experience of what inefficient use of myself felt like. And to me, this was like an experience of like, you mean this actually takes center stage here? We're actually going to look at this more clearly, because most of the advice I'd been given as a piano student, and for years afterwards too, I had excellent teachers, but most of the advice about how to organize yourself, it went from the elbow to the fingers.
Just boom.
Yeah, it did not include very much. I mean, maybe you were told to sit up straight.
Shoulder.
But there wasn't
you can't really have your shoulders back when you're playing the piano, can you?
You know, I don't really hold it against anybody. An hour piano lesson, right? There's very few people who are going to really take the time to show you, to help you figure out what it means to sit in a certain way. How does that manifest through your fingers so that you can actually see it? Most music lessons are going to do, guess what? They're going to focus on the music. Yeah. So I saw a real opportunity in the work, and I was very interested because not only did we do an ATM lesson, but then it was followed with a kind of a master class where she worked with, I think, 3 different instrumentalists at their instruments.
Got it.
And so I was, again, in this summertime where all we did all day long was have master classes. A master class, for those of you who aren't familiar, you've probably seen the what's the website now called
Masterclass, yeah.
In the music world, a master class is essentially the pianist or whoever the musician is gives a performance of a piece that they are hopefully working on. You know, it's near ready to be performed. It's hopefully memorized. It's at a certain state of polish. And then they essentially have a public lesson with the teacher in front of an audience. So the audience gets to see the process. And of course, at a certain level of performance, what you're hearing is really great. And the nuances that are changed in the course of that public lesson may be very small. You may need a fairly high level of training to really appreciate the fact that they hold the rest for just this little while longer, even though a music lover, of course, could appreciate it. But there's a lot that's fairly, the student has already stabilized the piece at such a degree that the changes that are made can be quite small. What I saw when she worked with individual musicians was the changes were quite big.
Yeah.
And of course, these are very talented kids. Don't get me wrong. These are very talented. These are not just people walking out off the street. These are very talented musicians. But I watched a close friend of mine, a pianist who I'd heard play a lot. I knew what she sounded like. You know, you're in a kind of environment where you hear somebody practicing down the hall. You go, well, there's Irene working on the wall sonata. There she is. I know that's her. I know the way she does the. Yeah, she's stuck in that passage. You get to know each other's playing. You know. Yeah. And so I knew what she sounded like, and she came up there, and Anat said to her, "Why don't you play a piece that you're working on? That's not, nothing that's really finished, but something that you're maybe struggling with." And I remember she played she played the B flat major Bach prelude from the first book of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And it's a very exposed playing, very fast.
This is on piano or on, okay.
You know, no pedal really. And anyway, she played it, and yes, she was struggling with it. She had it memorized, but it did not feel comfortable in her hands. It wasn't fluid. Anyway, Anat did things with her at the piano that no piano teacher would do. She had her,
tell us what.
Doubled over. She had her expanding her abdomen as she went up the piano. She had her arm draped over the top of her head and sweeping her elbow up and down the keyboard. I mean, it was not a piano lesson.
Yes.
And that's what was so fascinating. It was really about helping her to re-relate herself to the space of being in the instrument, and to get, you know, in a more technical sense, to get the bigger aspects of her body, the stuff that sits all in the background, to get that stuff more and more supportive of what's taking place in the foreground. And the result, I'll never forget the result, because when she, you know, they worked together for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And she said, "Why don't you play it again now?" And she played it again.
But without the hand over the head and these weird things.
She literally played the piece, right?
Yeah. Just
fingers on the
normal. Yeah.
Yeah. Play it again. See how it is now.
Yeah.
And she started playing, and about, 16 bars in, I mean, it was radically different. At about 16 bars in, she just froze. She just stopped, and her hands were like at her face. And I said, "Well, why'd you stop?" Because it sounded
beautiful.
Amazing. It sounded amazing. It was like a leap. And she said, "Why did you stop?" And she said, it can't be this easy. That's what she said.
Oh.
Now, that is a phrase I will never forget, because as a piano student, you know how rare those moments are. And you know how most of the time you don't get to pick those moments. And you sure as hell don't really know how to construct them deliberately. So that definitely got my attention. I really remember, because the other aspect of it, and I don't know that I'm reflecting on it here. I don't know that I really thought about it this way when I was there. But it's obviously, I didn't forget the story.
It imprinted on your entire system.
The thing was that comment about you needing to be a trained musician to really hear what the nuances are that get adjusted. You could have been the janitor in the back, sweeping the back row while this was going on, and your jaw would have dropped to hear the difference. And and it was just, to me, it was also a kind of like, artistically, it was like hearing, oh, that's how she sounds. That's her. That's her authentic artistic power, whatever you want to call it. And that, you'll know it when you hear it, when you hear it perform. If you spend enough time around live performance in music, there are moments that are just undeniably sort of glowing with a certain kind of quality to them. And that was definitely one. And it impacted me in such a way that, my dad was a writer for the National Geographic, so I grew up with a lot of books around. And when I left the workshop, I just went to the bookstore. That's what I did. I went to the bookstore and I was like, "Hi, do you have any books about," and I wrote down, about Feldenkrais, Moshe, do you have any books about this guy? And they said, "Well, let me see. I think we might have one." And they had the book Awareness Through Movement. And I was like, "Oh, thank you very much." So I bought the book, and I went home and I started reading it, and it was over my head. But coupled with that experience, I was very interested in what I was reading, and even though it was over my head, I was like, let's see what this guy has to say. Because the book was not only a kind of a practical philosophical layout of things, but it was also, there are printed lessons in the book that you can do. They're like these experiments that you can do. So,
It's funny that I would say that book, and I'll put it in the show more section if you're watching this on YouTube or somewhere else. It'll be somewhere near, but it's called Awareness Through Movement. It's quite a thin book. It's not big. But I'll never forget. Have you ever met Ryan?
Over here somewhere.
Grab it. We'll show it to the screen. But have you ever met Ryan Nagy? He's one of our colleagues.
That's the copy.
Oh, that's an old copy.
That's an old one.
Wow. That's still hardback.
Yeah.
Great.
Still got it. So.
Have you met Ryan, one of our colleagues? He's okay. Anyway, I've known him for a while, and he has online resources as well. But he also stumbled across that book. And at the time, he was homeless, living somewhere in a rundown shack. I don't know the details anymore. And he's talked about this. And for whatever reason, he found that book. He was drawn to it, and he was reading the lessons sentence by sentence and doing the movements.
Mm-hmm.
And similar to yourself, it just something shifted. He had never thought of his movement or these things in quite the same way. So it is interesting how that it's so simple, and it can put a big punches. It's a big punch when you really get into it.
Well, it's also that, I mean, I had a very similar experience of literally reading the book, and, you know, people today, you know, students in training programs are like, it's hard for me to read the lessons and do them.
I know.
And my answer is, no, it's not.
Yeah.
No, it's not. You're just looking for a more convenient way in that you think exists or you expect. It's not. I would sit there and just read, okay, lesson 1, I'm lying on the floor. Okay, there's a lot of stuff here. Okay, wait, let's get to the part where I'm supposed to do
something, yeah.
Okay, it says, all right, lift your arm slowly enough that your shoulders, and okay, and I close the book and lift, and that's the way I would do it. And when again, looking back on it,
mm-hmm.
there are a couple of things about that experience that I think are actually very, very positive.
Mm-hmm.
One is you are voicing the instructions to yourself.
Right.
Right. And you know, Moshe was interested in Emile Coué and translated Coué's book on self-hypnosis.
Hypnosis.
Right? You know,
Yes.
what was the phrase? Every day in every way, I'm getting better and better, or whatever it was, you know. But to read the instructions out loud, which I did, in your own voice, to sort of instruct yourself, is very much in the spirit of the work. There's also something quite, I don't know, I have a kind of a nice memory of that time coming home. And really, the book was just, it was growing on me. Like, it's the kind of thing you just kept coming back to, because there wasn't anything else going on in my life like that. And I was very interested in getting better at the piano. And this was outside of most of the categories of things that one would do to get better at the piano. And yet I was already very interested. And there were many days that summer where I was in my room doing the lessons. The brown carpet in my room, I will never forget. and literally just reading through it. And there's something very powerful in spending that private time with yourself,
mm-hmm.
both interpreting what you're reading,
mm-hmm.
trying to test it and apply it to yourself, measuring your experience as you do it. I mean, the book really contains those instructions, right?
Yeah.
There's something very independent making about that. So that later, you know, years, I mean, this was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
24 years ago for me. You know, when I eventually went to a training program to become a certified teacher, I had at least had a lot of experience,
mm-hmm.
not only doing ATM in classes with different teachers, or, you know, through audio cassettes or whatever it was at the time,
mm-hmm.
but I'd also had that experience basically reading the book to myself and working my way through it, which is not to say that I understood everything or I had sort of mastered it. It's just that I was more oriented in it. In other words, I had oriented myself. I wasn't dependent on some other person or a teacher. It left me a little more independent in my thinking, in the way I thought about it and applied it. So
it was more self-generating. It
is more self-generating.
That true. I mean, I think that true element of real self-study we've sort of lost it in some ways. And I remember in my Feldenkrais training, many people had come into that training and there were a few who had never even done or gone to a Feldenkrais awareness through movement class. So that's the group class for those of you who are new to this. And many hadn't done a one-on-one session, and many hadn't even read a book or two. And it just really confused me. but I think you and I are very similar. It's why we hang out and we're friends. You know, we have that same desire to study and to seek. I'm curious, did you ever want to become a pianist as a profession?
Yes.
And how did that change from that, and now you're doing what you do as a Feldenkrais practitioner, assistant trainer?
It took me a while to realize that I wasn't prepared to be a professional pianist.
Mm-hmm.
It also took me a while to realize that that may not be the life that I wanted for myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, certainly there was a time when, I mean, when I came back from Tanglewood was when I became serious, quote unquote, I became serious. In other words, I took my piano practicing more seriously. Before I went to Tanglewood, I was taking weekly lessons with a neighborhood teacher, and I would always play at the end of the recital. And I was, you know, very, you know, Andrew's, you know, got a lot of encouragement. And I came from a fairly musical family, and I have older brothers who played instruments. And,
Mm-hmm.
but I grew up as a suburban kid. And that has certain downsides to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I, you know, if you're going to go into that career, it's not that you have to start playing when you're 3 years old. It just doesn't hurt.
Right.
It doesn't hurt.
That's usually where you start if you get to that place.
Yeah. And the great piano players, there are a lot of great piano players. The world is lousy with great piano players.
Mm-hmm.
And very few really make a career, and it's very demanding. I loved what I learned from studying that. I mean, I went on to conservatory. I went to Columbia for undergraduate, and then I went to conservatory for a master's degree in piano performance. Mm. But I suffered, you know, the second summer I went to Tanglewood, I crippled my right hand. I upped my practice regime. I got serious, so I had many more hours. Right. The repertoire became much more challenging, which I loved. Mm-hmm. But you know, it wasn't like Feldenkrais was just like some magic bullet that mm-hmm. you know, made me perfect. And so that injury, I nursed that injury for many years. Yeah. But Feldenkrais was really the way that I stayed out of the hand surgeon's office. Mm-hmm. And it was, of course, a very deep education. The gift of an injury is really something to consider. It does not present that way in the beginning. No. It feels very unfair. Mm-hmm. Feels very tragic. But once you learn to embrace it and find out what it has to teach you, mm-hmm. then you're in a different place. And that's another reason why the method really appealed to me. You know, Feldenkrais' story of really dislocating his knee, yeah. and taking on the challenge of not having it amputated at the time, yeah. as the doctors were recommending.
Of course.
You know, that's an interesting choice. That's really to choose pain as a teacher. Yeah. Because that kind of thing does not resolve itself.
No.
And probably never fully resolve itself, but the level of function that he attained is staggering, considering the nature of the destruction of the joint.
100%. And also, you know, even at this time, it's hard for someone to consider they have this injury. I mean, this is my experience. It's how I got into the work, was a knee injury. But even to this day, we know that so much can be done with neuroplasticity and rewiring movement patterns and so many alternative therapies and physical therapy and hydrotherapy. And yet there's still almost this sentence that people are given when you have this knee injury, this knee surgery, you bust your knee. So back then, you know, when he was in the early 1900s, it would have been the fact that he had that foresight to go, no. It'd be interesting to know if he ever considered the amputation, or I'm never going to walk again properly on two legs, or if there was just never a question, I'm going to fix this. I don't know if you've ever heard of any of those stories. If it's maybe it's.
Well, he was clearly a tenacious yes. mind. You know, I don't know what he did, convalescing in bed for however many months he did, not being able to walk. but I guarantee you, he boned up on his anatomy. I guarantee he learned more about his knee than he ever thought he would, and he probably knew more than the surgeons did after the experience. Not because he was a genius, just because he was so tenacious about it. I mean, to me, I have no idea what really took place, but I can only imagine that what he did was he reverse engineered his problem.
Yeah.
Well, I've got this horrific situation. I've got this time. How am I going to use this time to come to a different level of understanding with myself?
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that very few people really understand is necessary. The
Time.
lessons, the work, the work with a teacher, the way you use a teacher, you're really trying to come to a higher level of understanding of yourself.
Yeah.
And that can be painful. And I don't just mean physically. Because it's really challenges your model of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I injured my hand, you know, of course it created a whole cascade of, I'm not enough of this, my hand's too small to play that, blah, 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 blah. But then, you know, and you let that infest your personality, and you let that into the practice room, and you carry that stuff around with you, and it
like
just
poison.
Yeah, you don't realize the kinds of decisions you think you're making about yourself when you do that enough.
Mm-hmm.
And but you know, sometimes you just get lucky, and you can come across interesting people, or you know, different work, or you know, a book like this that really does stop you in your tracks.
Yeah.
It gets you to start thinking a little more objectively about what you're doing, not being so lost in your subjective experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can also, if you're really paying attention, you can go to a concert like I did and go hear Alicia De La Roca play the piano. Alicia De La Roca, I don't know how tall she is, but if she's 5 feet, I'd be shocked.
So she's short.
And you have small hands, and you hear this woman play the music of Granados, which is just so florid and interwoven and and you just think, well, clearly small hands are not my problem. Maybe it's my ears. Maybe it's how much training I've been putting in. You know,
right.
It's a good wake up call. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
So you made that decision at some point, or over the course of time. This is not my profession. Let's go and do the Feldenkrais training. What
I really saw was that I also had a very, very deep affinity for this work.
Yes.
It took a while to admit it.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that I really resonated with the tenaciousness that's involved,
mm-hmm.
with the intelligence that's in the work, and also, of course, there's a strange brilliance in this work, in the sense that you're really looking very clear-eyed at what it means to practice usefully.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, you described going into the training program and you know, some of the students not having very much background. You know, a lot of people, you know, I've been a Feldenkrais teacher professionally for almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
Very few people have an idea of practice. They don't have much of a relationship with practice. Yeah. I'm not saying they don't have skills and talents, but their notions about what practice means or why they're practicing something are fairly superficial.
Yeah. Can you give, like, what would be an example, if we break this down like into a petri dish, what would be an example of practice that is not, or I don't know, that is more superficial, isn't Andrew standard, versus practice that is really that diligent, more Feldenkraisian way? How would you break that down?
So the thing to understand is that the culture itself is absolutely saturated with images of the finished product, right? You're advertised all day long with all sorts of images about what you're going to feel like if you take product X in your breakfast cereal, or if you use product Y to buff out your car, or you know, right, whatever it is. And that psychological loop is presented to you ad nauseum. And, you know, I said I was a kid in the suburbs. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you may not realize what you lack. You may not have grown up in a culture that really, or a family, or you may not have been a part of a group of people that put stuff together in public in front of each other and worked on it together. You may not have been a part of a family of improvising musicians that, the kids that play music really well, certainly some of them drop out of the sky, but a lot of them grow up in a culture of music where they're around it a lot incidentally. They get to not have to pay, come on now, Irene, pay attention now, we're doing the piano lesson. It's around them.
I hated them, by the way. I had piano lessons and it didn't.
I taught piano lessons to kids. I taught piano lessons to kids for 2 years, I remember. And the first question I would always ask the new parents, it was a very nice school up a little bit north of the city. And I would always ask, I mean, I'm not a bad teacher, piano teacher, but teaching kids was not my jam, really.
Yeah.
But I would always ask them, so what kind of music do you like to listen to? And 90% of the time,
What? Yeah.
Listen to music? Yeah. Do you guys listen to music in the car together? Do you sing along to songs together? Is there music that, she likes to put on that you and your wife, no, really? You just want her to have piano lessons because that's
what you're supposed to do.
That's something you do now? Or
yeah.
So I mean, it's not that the kid can't discover that, hey, they love music. It's just you understand something about where they're coming from, right? And the kind of rigor it takes to put together enough order to understand how to read music and how to play music, it's a lot more than you think. And it's really, really helpful if you're just in a culture of music where your family understands what rhythm is, or your family dances in a particular style, and people know who's a good dancer and who's not. But Uncle so-and-so, he's not so good, but your aunt, blah, 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 she really does that. Look at this, the way she does it. You get a notion of what, lower and higher quality is. But, practice, the petri dish of practice. So if you walk through the halls of any conservatory, just average day, you walk down the hall, you're going to overhear a lot of people practicing.
Yeah.
And it's a social environment. You can hear the person practicing their concerto in the room next to you while you're working on yours. So there's a little bit of crazy, it's not ideal. A lot of what you hear is kind of neurotic practicing, which if people don't know what that is.
Yeah, how would you explain neurotic practicing?
90% of the time.
It's just like chaos, like.
Well, it's basically a person that is trying to perform the piece over and over and over again at slower speeds and gradually higher and higher speeds. It's the kind of psychological orientation to the practice where you're just trying to put more effort in to get it better. And of course, in order to play a piece in public, you do have to climb that ladder of competency. You have to have the piece memorized. You have to understand what maybe the composer wrote, or there are sort of standards of competence you are trying to meet. It's just that you may not be aware of how you're assembling that, because once you learn how to read music and you start to imbibe that, there are certain skills that you kind of take for granted. And then you try to push those skills forward to make them construct the thing that your mind is projecting you need to get to. And, that kind of practicing can sound like, you can hear this as you walk down the halls. Every musician who's been to music school knows exactly what that sounds like, because we all do that. We're all guilty. We all rush through things. Yeah. Because we have this notion, right? The writer Bill Zinsser calls it the tyranny of the final product, right? It's very hard for people when they actually write something that's going to be published. They just want it done so that it can be published. They want to satisfy the notion of what's completed. They don't like editing. People hate editing. And then the nature of learning, the nature of really high quality practice, to me, is a lot closer to the kind of care and time and attention that a really good editor will actually take a sentence and will begin to understand the difference between what it's trying to say and versus what it actually does say. what the words actually are versus, and then we'll be able to tease out where is it cross-motivated. You're trying to say this, but it gets caught when you add too many phrases in between this and that. So maybe we can shorten this, we can take out this word. And of course the writer goes, you know, you want to just be able to produce the thing. It's not as sexy to go back in and redo and redo and redo. The truth is that is what produces amazing writing or amazing performances. And, you know, I watched an interview with the pianist André Schiff, who the interviewer was asking him about when he plays Schubert, and he was sort of describing the way that Schubert voices some of the chords on the piano. You know, a chord, you're playing multiple notes at the same simultaneously. And Schiff was talking about how important it is to be able to weight the chord properly. You know, you may have 5 notes in the chord, but you want the top note and the third note from the bottom to actually come out the brightest, and then the bass note has to have another quality. I mean, this is sophisticated stuff.
Detail.
Yeah, detail. And he says, well, how do you practice that? And he says, oh, I love practice. He says, sometimes I'll just sit for 2 or 3 hours just weighting chords. Now, if you think about that, if you walk by that practice room, it's not going to sound like a person, you know, busily practicing a piece. It's going to sound unrecognizable as anything, and yet it's unbelievably valuable. It's getting that person so deeply inside and oriented properly to what they're trying to feel for and do, that later on, once they get stabilized with that understanding, later on in the performance, you will describe that quality as that person is just a genius. The truth is they had to take the time to really build that. And it's not something that the public, for the most part, ever gets to hear. It's not a performance. It's not even that interesting sounding. You know? It's interesting to the person doing it, who's really trying to distinguish these levels of quality in what they're doing, or refinement. But so to me, I mean, there's a great book called there's a great book called Talent is Overrated, but there's another book called he writes for Outside Magazine. What is his name? Cubby? Anyway, doesn't matter. I'll remember it in a second. But the book describes the Meadowmount Music School.
Okay.
And that their motto is, or the director of the school is quoted as saying, you know, you have these little shacks that people go and practice in the wood. He says the motto is, if I walk by your practice room and I can tell what piece you're working on, you're not practicing. Got it. In other words, you're working at too much of a finished level. Yeah, you haven't actually broken it down and gotten it more. You're not at the deeper levels yet.
That's interesting. And it if I think back to your description of that friend of yours, where Anat Banyel did some movements with her, and she was shocked at how easy it was, you know, and I want to bridge into sort of the normal person, the person who isn't the musician, who's got some injuries and some body pain, or needs to find a new way of walking or rolling. You know, I'm big about teaching people going to the floor and coming back up, this up and down quality. It's sort of like you said, there's this problem, I have this injury, I want that outcome, let's fix that spot. Like the wrist. The wrist is as you said, I'm not sure if it was a repetitive strain that you had or a carpal tunnel, but you know,
tendonitis. It was basically
tendonitis. So, you know, it's like, well, how can we strengthen? How can we stretch? How can we mobilize and get the inflammation down? And I think this is where the Feldenkrais work is so interesting, and why we love this work, but it's so difficult for folks to understand that fixing, and I use that term like with air quotes, fixing the sore wrist or the sore knee or the sore lower spine, for example, often requires nothing around that specific area but all the other areas that connect with it, if that makes sense. And I when we decided to have this chat, I sent you a quote from you. So I'm going to tell people what this was, because we have recently we always have been in touch whenever I come to New York. And by the way, that's where New York, or Andrew practices, is in New York City, and online. So we'll talk about your online work in a bit. But, you know, this ability to take the injury that you're working with and not focus on it, because then we're focusing on what we would say the problem is, as opposed to the whole person. Anyway, so I was doing one of your ATM lessons online here in the comfort of my own home. And you said something that just pinged to me. So rather than reading a book, I was listening, but I still wrote it down. And I really was like, let's dig into this. And so you said, in regards to the Feldenkrais work, this is considered a dark art, hard to teach, extreme willingness to imagine and suspend the idea of what you think should happen to see if it actually does happen. So there's a lot in that piece, but this idea of this work being a dark art and hard to teach, it kind of goes back to what you were saying about the music camp, where if you walked by the shack, you shouldn't be hearing the piece. It's like saying to someone, oh, you have a bummed knee, don't work on the knee. So how would you speak to that, or how would you extrapolate this dark art of the Feldenkrais work? Because it sounds almost like it's a scary thing, but it actually is quite brilliant, and we know that. But what makes it dark? What makes it, this tougher to teach?
Well, as a student coming in, you have an orientation to your problem.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you have a notion about why your hand is this way, and maybe you know what you did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you've been told that that's tendonitis. That's the tendons are strained, and you're holding your hand in this position. And then the next thing, I'm not supposed to hold my hand in that position. I'm supposed to always hold in this position. Okay, how's that going to work? You very quickly enter this maze of thinking, right?
Yeah.
That often doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Or you've been unable to make it make sense. And the thing about what happens for a person when they're coming to take an awareness through movement lesson, I mean, we should really sort of differentiate between a class versus maybe a one-on-one situation.
Sure.
Working
Please.
with private clients or whatever. But that statement of a willingness to suspend your idea of what's supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Part of this is you want to be able to appreciate your subjective experience, your own experience of the discomfort of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows it's inconvenient, it's pain, and the painfulness of pain.
Yeah.
But you have to admit you have to be okay with being in a situation that may not be immediately solving your problem. Because this mindset that, okay, we're about to do something that's going to be beneficial, right?
Yeah.
This expectation gets in the way. Now, of course, who doesn't want their problem to be resolved on the quicker side as far as
immediately?
Very few people are like, hey, sign me up for 20 years of deep, Feldenkrais, please.
Yeah.
And of course, the only way to put that into context is just that it's enjoyable to work. Once you understand what it means to learn, that
Mm-hmm.
you are in the driver's seat more and more,
Mm-hmm.
that you know how to ask for help better. You also know how to ask yourself questions, which is very rare among people.
Yes.
You know how to ask questions in order to frame the problem differently. You know what it means to actually put yourself physically in a position that reduces the strain on yourself.
Yeah.
Right. The person that knows that occasionally they do need to lie on their floor with their feet up on the couch, like in a 90-degree angle, just to take some of the pressure off their lower back. This can be a revelation to a person
Yeah.
who for 30 years has never done that. You know, instead they've been walking around just with the idea that, damn this lower back, it's, you know, curses my, you know, my family has always had this problem, right? You know, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
so much of what happens when you engage in learning is you really are having to momentarily, deliberately, you're suspending your idea of how it's supposed to go. Because what you need to do is to appreciate, discriminate, and assemble your experience a little bit differently. And that takes a little bit of time.
It does.
And the lovely part is when you get to work with a teacher that really skillfully and compassionately sets up a situation where that's possible, and where it's not a delivery of therapeutic services, even though that can be a godsend too, of course.
Yes.
But the real gold here is you learning how to enter that space for yourself. Now, it takes different people, different lengths of time with different kinds of teachers to figure out how that might be done more and more skillfully. But, you know, this, going back to this comment I made about the editor being able to see the difference between what the sentence is trying to say versus what it actually says.
Yes.
This is very much, there's a statement that Feldenkrais makes in the Awareness to Movement book, when I think it's the pelvic clock lesson. It's a lesson where you're on your back with your knees bent, you're rolling your pelvis in various directions away from the neutral, away from the resting place. And you're basically learning how to mobilize the center of your body in a better connection with the rest of you. Yeah. And of course, it does something very, very smart. It reverses the normal relationship we have, which is we're used to moving the more distal parts of ourselves with greater skill and awareness. And the big heavy stuff in the middle, not so much. Right?
It's just so thick and heavy, why move it?
That's right. And so the lesson gets you to reverse that and put the attention on learning how to more skillfully distinguish what it's like to move the pelvis in all these various degrees, which it's really built to do. And at one point in the lesson, he's having you imagine that the pressure that the back of the pelvis makes on the floor, it's as if you have numbers on the back of your pelvis in the shape of a clock, and you're touching the 6 to the floor, or the 4 to the floor. You do that sort of thing. And then at some point, the instructions change. And he says, now imagine there are also numbers that are painted on the floor, and that the numbers on the back of your pelvis come to meet the numbers that are on the floor, like a rubber stamp that slowly inks the paper, and you can feel that perfect meeting place between the rubber part of the stamp and the paper. And he says explicitly, this is about learning how to narrow the gap between your subjective experience and a more objective experience. Yeah. And that is that willingness to suspend, like what you think should happen. You're projecting a certain future for yourself. You want it to get better. You think, I got to do more push-ups. You're intending something. You're projecting that you think this will produce that. And the problem is maybe your level of skill or your level of certainty about that. And the method helps you actually step outside that kind of overly willful driven experience, so that you can really see what is this experience actually comprised of, because the body is fairly complex and you don't know a lot about it. You don't know a lot. Even if you've had a lot of training, you may have not had a lot of time really clarifying what is my own subjective experience. What do my sentences actually say versus what I'm trying to say with them? And so that's a really important distinction, that we're not ever going to get to an objective understanding. You're never going to objectively understand reality. That would mean omniscience, right? And this is unlikely. But the idea is that you're learning to narrow the gap, right? In the same way that, I mean, to put it in sort of the physical skills category. A professional baseball pitcher, okay, that person not only knows how to throw the ball fast, not only knows how to throw the ball accurately, but is so well versed, they're so clearly oriented in their subjective experience of how to throw, they really know how to throw it so it will go right down the middle and then just fade in this lazy way off to the outside of the plate, because this batter hates that kind of pitch, and he knows just how to teach him with that kind of pitch. And so that person really knows how narrow they really narrowed the gap. Versus if you put me on the mound and you said, Andrew, throw it low and inside, I would go, all right, I'll give it a shot, and we'll see what happens. You know, for me, that gap is actually very, very wide in that domain. I'll try, but I really don't have a clear understanding. And you know, the method, what's dark about it is that it asks you to step back from this precipice of you must do it like this. You must put more effort into it. You're not a good person unless you try harder, all this kind of stuff. And it also gives very sound reasons for why you want to do that. That's one of the things I really appreciated about the method was Feldenkrais goes to great pains to explain why. Why do you want to slow down for an hour? What is the dramatic purpose for doing this? It's not to become a slow, lazy person.
No.
And it's also not to turn. Well, it's a problem. It's a problem because the instructions to go slowly, which certainly the Feldenkrais method around the world. What is Feldenkrais? If anybody knows what the hell it is, they're going to say, well, if they do all that slow
stuff.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with going slow.
Yeah.
The problem is when you dogmatize it.
Yeah.
And you don't know why.
Yeah.
Because it's really possible to move very slowly in a very disorganized way and to not learn a damn thing.
Exactly.
That is really one of the possibilities, and there are plenty of examples of that out there.
There are.
The thing is, you have to explain a little bit. It takes a minute. You know, you need to know what is slow. Slow is not a principle. Slow is a strategy. And if you don't understand the difference between principles and strategies, it's okay. It's okay. But by next week, you better have a working idea of the difference. So explain
it for us, for those that aren't sure what that is, because I think this is really important. Because
it's extremely important.
Because
it's extremely important.
You know, you have, and I'll speak to what I've seen over the last 5 years when I shifted how I teach the Feldenkrais work, how I talk about it, how I get people to notice things differently, I challenge differently. But a lot of the students that I have, even my online students, have said, I hated that Feldenkrais stuff. I didn't like it. I couldn't connect to it. It just was blah. And I think that's unfortunate because it goes back to, well, how were you taught? Were you ready for that level of detail? Was your system still super anxious with PTSD due to that accident? And so things had to be shifted for that.
Let me tell you something. The student matters.
Yes.
The DNA of the student, it really matters. The teacher really matters. This is not so different from a lot of other disciplines. You can go have piano lessons. Go take piano lessons. Come back and tell me how it was. She beat me with a ruler. I hate piano. Piano's terrible. Let's talk about that, right? That stuff really matters. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's true. It's true. So no, just I think there's confusion often around what the work is, what it isn't. And one of our mutual teachers, Jeff, Haller, he would say, and Moshe would also, he was an athlete. He knew how to be physically powerful and be speedy, but not hurried. And so we do these movements in the class that are so slow, and it never seems to translate to general everyday life, or even lessons that are a bit quicker, a bit faster. Anyway, so back to that idea of principles.
And what's your interpretation of why that is? Why do you think that is? That it never seems to translate into anything faster?
My personal experience is that most of the teachers don't have that rigor in their own body. They haven't trained themselves to have that physical capacity, that athletic. Not to say that everyone should be an athlete, by no means. But generally speaking, in our more Western world, especially North America, most people aren't rigorous with their bodies in a good way in terms of exerting power and intensity. And so there just is this thought that, oh, that's what the athletes do. And because I'm this way, I'm going to go to this so slow class and go for my leisurely walk, but I can't do these other things. And so, but we know the human system has all these different forms of muscle fibers that are meant for power, meant for aerobic capacity, et cetera, et cetera. So that's that's why I think it comes down to the teacher, and also, of course, that teacher being able to embody that vitality, and we often just don't see that.
Yeah.
From what I've seen.
Well, there's an audience problem as well as a teacher problem.
Yeah.
You cannot take a group, if we're talking about a professional training program, a bunch of students who want to be a certified Feldenkrais teachers, you cannot take a group of 50 people who are coming from very different times in their life, very different medical histories, very different personalities, very different intents for coming to the training. You cannot take that group of people and just say, okay, we're now going to do fast judo flips in the room.
No.
That's why that rarely happens.
Yeah.
You need people to select themselves specifically for that kind of training. And then, yes, you need a teacher that actually knows what they're talking about. There's a lot that goes on in the method that is aspirational, that's constantly pointing towards where this will lead. Well, show me the money, right? I mean, you really have to, there has to be a different generation of teachers that actually do that work of actually showing how that works. The back to the strategies and principles thing, the slowness is, of course, attractive to a particular audience too.
Yeah.
There are people that don't like that, that want to work hard, that actually enjoy exertion, challenge, and that may not have traditionally been part of the North American audience for the Feldenkrais method. Yeah. There's no reason that there isn't that audience out there. It's a big world. It's a big world. The question is whether the teachers of the Feldenkrais method can actually meet that audience. The idea that everybody needs to be pulled into a sort of sphere of the method and that it's going to always be this particular way or taught particular that way is ridiculous. The notion of strength, of power, of agility, of, those things are in the work, and they can be very skillfully taught in the work. But you have to find the right teacher to do that sort of stuff.
I'll never forget the last time I was at a conference that a Feldenkrais conference. I don't even know where it was anymore, but Moti was teaching. Is it Nativ? I'm not sure, Nativ. And in our training, we did do the judo roll sequences. We did do the hand headstand sequences. And I hadn't done them in a while. And to be honest, if I was to go right into it today, I wouldn't be able to. But the capacity was there. And over the course of the day, he got us to do, I call them flying judo rolls, but you're literally leaping into it.
It's like a gymnastic, sort of a jumping roll, like an Aikido. Yeah.
Exactly. And I just remember thinking, holy Jesus, this occurred so simply. And I had previous training, obviously, in the Feldenkrais work to prepare my system for that inversion and that quickness and speed and the flex and the ribs and all of that. But it was really interesting to watch the teacher who implicitly knows that work and how to do it, and how he could guide this group of people who were really keen and interested in breaking it down step by step. And it happened within a day, I think. And I just thought it was great. And I always think to myself, man, it'd be great to go and do one of those workshops again, but they're so hard to find because there's so few people who can teach at that level. Right?
Well, and the truth is, for the public, whatever that means, the public.
Of course.
If you had a group of people that really wanted to work in that direction, it takes time.
It's not going to happen in a weekend.
If you're 49 and you're a little out of shape and you're intellectually very excited about this Feldenkrais method, but you're not really physically prepared there, it's a little dishonest to tell that person that, yeah, we're gonna do judo rolls and you're gonna figure this out. It's gonna take you some time. And also, wouldn't it be better to safely learn how to do judo rules? Like the attraction for some percentage of the public to the method is how safe it is. That's one of the main factors, is that the reduced speed, the attentional, the sort of embodied cognition element of the work, the time, the mindful quality of everything. This is very attractive because I'm not likely to get hurt doing this stuff, which is great. But there are people in the world that like to exert, that like to roll, that do martial arts or do other kinds of sports. And they deserve a method that can meet them where they are. They really do. So yeah, back to this strategy principle thing. It's still like hanging in my head. Is it okay if I go back?
Yeah, go.
Because we were talking about just this notion of going slowly, right? Which is really embedded in this sort of idea of what practice is, right? So when you go, the problem is when you imagine that slow is the principle. Now, what's the difference between a principle and a strategy? What would you say is the difference for you between a principle and a strategy?
Well, a principle is something that can be applied across everything that you're doing. Whereas a strategy, it's funny, I often go to cooking as an example. Like there's techniques, we would call that a strategy of how to properly cut an onion, right? So that you get your most bang for your buck. So it's not, cut it a certain way. There's a strategy to that, how you hold, but you can't take that strategy to how you wash your car. Right?
Knife for the car, and it won't go so well.
It's not going to work with the knife on the car. But the principle of, is there a softness in the breath? Is there a strain and are you putting more effort into it? That you can apply to the cutting of the onion and the cleaning or waxing of your car. Right. To break that down in a real simple way. How did I do?
Great. I mean, that's a good place to start. I'll try to take it a step
further. And then go further. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. To me, I mean, the problem is also that principles, there are conversations around the Feldenkrais method that says, great, the work is the principle of no principles. Ooh, I'm so, how fascinating, right? Which just leaves students going, huh?
What?
The word principle does conjure up this idea that the principle is widely applicable. It's a good thing in every situation. That's what people tend to think of my principles. Like, I will never lie. There are situations, not many, but there are situations when, maybe to protect somebody's life or, something like this, lying might really be justified or actually the wise choice, right?
Yeah.
But of course, we tend to think of principles that we live by. Now, some of the biomechanical principles in the work have to do with how not to really unnecessarily put force across the skeleton in ways that make the musculature just live in compensation all the time.
Yeah.
Right. So certain of the biological principles, like that the force should go up and through the skeleton, right? Well, what does that mean, right? That's basically an engineering term. That means try not to shear across the skeleton. So here's your bone, right? Here's your bone. And the idea is it's very strong if you push through the axis, right? Now, if what you want to do is support weight, this is a great position for this pencil to be in. If you put it like this and you put that's not so great because now it's at an angle and there are different properties at work there. Now, if you want to break the pencil, pushing this way is really hard because you're pushing into its strength. If you want to break the pencil, you go across, you do that, and you break the pencil, right?
Yeah.
The important thing is to understand the difference and then to be able to apply it to the way you move and actually how you sense what you're doing as you're moving. Now, to me, the principle is, am I always going up and through my spine? No, I violate it quite regularly. But do I understand it practically? Yes, I do. And to me, it functions much more like, it's like a gauge on your car. You look at your instrument panel on your car. The altimeter on a plane is telling you how many feet you are off the ground.
Yeah.
Now, it's not telling you should always be 1,000 feet off the ground. You got to land the plane. You have to go below 1,000 feet. But that altimeter is always giving you useful information about the nature of your orientation in the activity, right? That's what understanding the principle does. The idea that the breath should always be soft. I don't know. There are times when I have to carry air conditioners up from the basement this morning because it's getting hot out.
Yeah.
The breath is not terribly soft.
No.
The principle is that my breath shouldn't be tied unnecessarily into the activity. Can I freely breathe as I'm trying? Do I have to hold my breath just to move the air conditioner? That's expensive neurologically. It's expensive muscularly. It's expensive on my joints. So it's something that I can do, but can I use the principle to read the nature of the situation, to interpret my experience more clearly, right? That's really what a good principle can do for a person. Now, a strategy is just, it's a choice you're making in the learning process. I mean, in terms of the Feldenkrais method, in the lesson, when he says, turn your head, to the left, but don't move your eyes away from that spot on the wall. You could talk about that in terms of a constraint, but it's in terms of the learning. Why the hell are we doing this? Are we doing this because whenever you turn your head to the left, people, you never want to move your eyes off any spot? Like, this is the way some people, they respond to these moments because they've really never been in kind of a rich experimental
teaching
situation like the method can present. But it's a strategy. What's the strategy for? The strategy is to help produce a certain sensation that you're unlikely to just do yourself for, random reasons, so that you can do what? So that you can observe how it affects the experience of the turning of the head or the stiffness in the neck. It's to help you understand what sort of handles there are in your subjective experience that you didn't even realize were there. There are choices you're making all the time that you don't know that you're making, and those choices are making you. And if you don't understand what they are, good luck to you.
Yes.
Good luck, because that's what you'll need. You'll need luck. But it's very hard to grow and develop and refine what you're doing unless you're willing to really experiment. And that's the difference between, principles and strategies. Going slow is not a principle. Sometimes you have to go fast.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes it's the right thing to do. Sometimes if you don't go fast, what you're going to suffer by choosing not to go fast, 5 minutes later we'll have another conversation. You will wish you had gone fast at that particular moment, like getting across the street with a car bearing down on you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But in learning, the strategy of going slow, it does a couple of things for you. It buys you time. It gives you the ability to actually notice for maybe the first time in your life that you tend to stiffen your back when you try to move this way instead of allowing the back to roll or organizing the pelvis better. It creates a window of opportunity where you can see the things you don't ordinarily see, and you can learn how to actually stabilize your view of those things in real time. When a pianist practices slow, like there's certain pieces where the composer writes allegro con fuoco, fast with fire.
Got it.
And guess what? When you sit down for the first time with that piece, maybe you're a good sight reader, but you may not be playing allegro.
You're not going that fast.
No, and you're suddenly faced with the realization. So how much time is this piece going to take me? How long is it? Because if I just try to play it and try to play it and try to play it, and maybe I slow it down a little, okay, a little slow, and try. How long is that process going to take to actually produce something worth listening to? Well, if you don't slow it down enough, you're extending the time. You're actually slowing down the learning process rather than speeding it up. So in certain martial arts, they say, slow is fast and fast is smooth or whatever. But, these kinds of, this notion of why are you doing it is so important, because there are certainly ways to play slowly, to practice slowly. If you don't understand what you're doing, your slow practice will ruin your ability to play the piece quickly.
Say that again. That's really important.
When you play the piano slowly, your fingers you have a lot of time. And so your fingers may be kind of, I don't know, sluggish. They have more time. They're kind of lazy when you go slow. But you may enjoy that time because you're learning how to get more accurate with the sequence of the notes or the articulation that you're making. there are different kinds of tricks for playing slowly so that the fast playing will actually make sense. Like you can play slowly by going, instead of playing pom, 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 and with deliberate pressure on each finger, you might be playing bop, 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 making very quick strikes,
Yeah.
you know? Because when you play that piece at tempo, the time the finger is going to spend pressing the key, it's not slow. It's going to be instantaneous.
Fast.
And so there are all kinds of tricks you can use in the learning process to kind of front load the future into what you're doing, even though it's in a different dynamic. It's in a different layer, you know. I got a good quote for you. Can I read a quote for you?
Yeah.
I got a quote on, I was reading edge.org, which asks scientists some, you know, questions about the future or whatever. But I saw a nice description of what genius is, and it's from an essay written by Eric Weinstein. He says the essence of genius as a modality is that it seems to reverse the logic of excellence. The reason for this is that sometimes we must, at least initially, move away from apparent success and headlong into seeming failure to achieve outcomes few understand or even possible. This is the essence of the so-called adaptive valley, which separates local hills from true summits of higher fitness. Genius at a technical level is the modality combining the farsightedness needed to deduce the existence of a higher peak with the character and the ability to survive the punishing journey to higher ground. Needless to say, the spectacle of an individual moving against his or her expert community away from carrots and towards sticks is generally viewed as a cause for alarm, independently of whether that person is a malfunctioning fool or a genius about to invalidate community groupthink. The heroes and rebels don't even accept the landscape as immovable, but see dunes of fitness to be shifted by a sculpting or leveling of the landscape with an eye towards altering the fitness of chosen populations. Long sentences. But
that's more than a quote, but that's very good.
Yeah. It's a paragraph for sure.
Yeah. Yes.
And really, in practice, that's what you're doing. You can see that in order to get to this level, you cannot just go to that level, right? If your desire is to do a cartwheel, the first time you do it might not go so well. How are you going to break it down? How are you going to think intelligently about it so that going slowly or stepping back is not just seen as sort of like, oh, that's a punishment. I have to practice slow. But it's actually an intelligent choice because you're learning to stabilize a layer or a view that you really don't understand. There's a foundational layer that's really important for you to understand that you don't yet. Yeah.
That's so important. And I think what you said before that quote, and I'll have to get the link so that we can share it, about often if we're going slower, taking our time, if we don't do that, that harms the future, that harms the end result. I'm paraphrasing, but it can be so difficult in our world of kind of quick fix. You know, the example I often give is we think of healing and helping the body as I have an infection, take a course of antibiotics for 2 weeks and then it's over. Or I have a broken bone, you know, I get it plated, I get it fixed, and then it heals and then it's done, you know. And we've been taught, and sometimes we need to do those things. And then this other thing that you and I play and dabble with and is our work is it's like a 180 degree shift to how we've been taught to memorize and take the tests. Like, I'm not going to learn it if it's not on the test. That kind of mentality. So when you read that, it kind of made me feel into that.
It's so different because
a little slowness there.
You just froze for a moment there. So.
Yeah, that's okay.
You're back, but now you're. It seems glitchy for the moment.
Saying that it's unstable.
Now you're back.
Now we're back.
Okay.
All good.
Yeah, I agree. You know, the model of learning that you're talking about, right? The Feldenkrais really it's a way of understanding how learning works. Now, for most people, that's not very sexy, right? I want to go take a class on how learning works, and I agree. Who cares about that? I want to play the piano better. That's why I'm there. I want to walk I want to know what strength feels like when I walk, or what balance actually means, or what it feels like. There are skills I want to acquire, or, you know, experiences I want to have, or whatever. But I'm also not just interested in what they call, you know, state change. You know, you can move slowly on the floor and not really have much of an idea, and it's kind of meditative, and you come up feeling refreshed. And so you've had a little bit of a state change, but that's very, very different than a trait change.
Yes.
And, you know, the kinds of choices that you have to make when you're in more of a medical model, right? Which is important. You know, a good doctor, got lots of doctors in my family, my wife's family. You know, you're making a choice of, what doctor do I go to see? Do I trust this person? And when the treatment is delivered to you, you know, the gold standard of, you know, scientific research for medicine is that the delivery of the medicine is not so as important as whether the medicine is the right thing for what you have, right?
Yeah.
And so you're not having to sort of take such responsibility for making the medicine work once it goes inside of you. That's not the level of causality things are working at there. But with this kind of stuff, you are really learning what it means to enjoy taking responsibility for the behaviors which are in your welcome. You know, they are in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
You do want to acquire these skills. You know, if working with people for 20 years has taught me anything, it's not that I'm going to become the world's greatest pianist or anything so silly. It's as much taught me what I really don't want to do. Why do I not want to go down this particular road in this particular way? You know, the ability to inhibit really negative outcomes is a kind of a superpower, because it means that you really understand how to trust your intuition. You know, I can remember a day when I had injured my knee, right? I had injured it in a way that really, I wasn't sure if I was going to go to the doctor or not. I was going to see if my little Feldenkrais powers were going to help me for a while. Yeah. And they did. It took a while. I've had that with many injuries. I've helped myself through those. But there was a time when my daughters were 8 and 5, and we went for ice skating lessons. And I was walking around, you know, my knee was just kind of ginger. And they were like, "Daddy, come on the ice with us." And I just looked at them and I said, no.
You knew.
As much as I wanted to, the ability to say no was a very powerful, healthy thing for me to do. That was not a good place for me to be.
Yes.
I was taking care of myself. I was doing something that would ensure a shorter amount of time before that thing would heal up and get more better. And I'm glad I did. And in the same way, you know, my study of the method and my use of the lessons just personally for myself, it also helped make me more physically fit, stronger. I got to be one of the dads in the park. I played with the kids. I climbed up and around the jungle gym equipment. I ran around with them on my shoulders. I got to be the kind of father I wanted to be with them in terms of that kind of vitality. You know, in this day and age in New York, you see a lot of first time dads in their 40s, or I was in my 30s, but you know, you see a lot of dads who are a little older with their kids now, and you know, a lot of phones, a lot of just looking at the phone, and they don't have that running around experience with the kids, and that was something that I really was able to choose, that I'm really glad that I did. So
that's so great. It's interesting, I haven't shared this with you, but I'm going to date this where, you know, it's the 30th of May, and when we're recording this, I might put this out in a month or so, but because of COVID-19 and things shutting down, my regular routine, I had been getting back into doing some physical therapy, some massage therapy because of my injuries that were quite severe, to the point where the doctor had said to me, my current GP, we just got my x-rays a few months ago, you shouldn't even be able to walk, let alone stand up. Your knee is so damaged. And yesterday, my husband and I just went for a 2-hour hike, and I squat and I bike and I can't skate anymore. Like I went skating a little while ago, ice skating, and I was like, no, I can't, this is not safe. But interestingly enough, Andrew, because of my inability to see these helpers that have been helping me, I've had to come back to my skills within the Feldenkrais work. I've been exploring your audio lessons, so I want to talk about that. We've done a session or two one-on-one. I've been more diligent daily to take time on the floor and work with my body, work with my knee, work with everything. And it was actually a blessing, not even in disguise, because it's not in disguise anymore, that I had to take it back into my own system. I'm like, wait a second, I used to help people with this stuff, kind of fallen off that wagon. And so it was really nice to know, by applying the principles and strategies and the body of work. And I haven't taught in a while, but it was just, I had it. And I think that was what, it was very cool to me. It's like, wait a second, I'm not limping. My knee isn't swollen.
Yeah, it's almost always shocking. Improvement is often, for most people, it's always shocking.
Yeah.
Very few people have that experience where they improve from the session, which is, if you know what you're doing, you can really produce it.
Yeah.
But people just they're always shocked because it's rather unusual in their life, the way that things have been going. But the amazing thing is that, your kinesthetic intelligence, it's a renewable resource. It takes your attention. It takes a practice usually, but it is a renewable resource. Yep. It's there. Your ability to learn is still there. Mm-hmm. You just don't treat it like a consumer. Don't treat it like a thing that, an activity that gives me this benefit. There's more to it than that, Exactly. And that's just a great story that you come back to it. It's still there. Your ability to refine and improve. And then it's also daunting, well, how much do I want to improve? How is this going? And then you get excited, right? You get excited, you maybe do too much or whatever. But and once again, you learn to orient yourself on the path. That is the goal, is to learn how to orient yourself on the path you're on. That's such a important thing.
It's so good. So you are sitting in the state of New York. Whenever I am in New York, which usually is often, but it hasn't been the last little bit because of the travel situation, I will come and see you in your lovely office in Union Square. That isn't happening right now, but if anyone's watching this and when you get back into practice, that's where you can find Andrew. But you have had to shift everything online. Tell me how that's going and what you're offering, because even I wasn't sure if a session one-on-one with Feldenkrais and that would work, and yet it has proven to be very valuable. So how's that been?
There have been some really lovely things that have happened. One is, a few of my clients had other things they had to worry about. They had companies of 150 employees or 1,000 employees, or, they needed, their attention had to be on that right now. Yeah. And so it was like, well, we'll see each other when this is over. I totally understand that. But, 80% of my clients, I just said, we're going to do this online. They know how I am in the sessions. Mm-hmm. They know what it's like to work with me. They know that I don't just, it's not like I talk the whole time, but they know that they're going to get their questions answered when they're working with me. Mm-hmm. They know that I'm really interested in making a space so what is happening for you in this moment too? I need their feedback as part of the process, So to me, moving onto Zoom, it's an embarrassment of riches. The technology nowadays, imagine this 20 years ago, right? imagine how panicked I would be about what are we supposed to do. This is really easy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's a huge opportunity for the method. I'm working with people from about 3 or 4 different continents right now through Zoom, one-on-one. It's wonderful. I had international clients on Zoom before the pandemic, but now just more people have found me, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. But I was also teaching online group classes. I was teaching awareness through movement last year. I started my website's called bodyofknowledge.me. Mm-hmm. And I started something I called the Body of Knowledge course. It was essentially awareness through movement online. And I also started to record everything and put the recordings on the course. So it's like a monthly subscription course. the cool thing is that when the pandemic started, I just thought, okay, I'm teaching. That's it.
Yeah.
You know, because most people's experience, not everybody. I have clients that come 3 times a week. I have clients when they fly into New York, they come and have 2 sessions a day for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
This is also part of the way things can be. But you know, I just said I'm teaching now. I'm teaching every day. I'm teaching twice a day. So for 7 weeks, I taught daily classes twice a day.
Amazing.
And what was awesome was to see everybody show up. Most people, I think, in a typical time, in a typical context, most people go to their ATM class once a week if they're into it.
Mm-hmm.
And here, there were people coming twice a day for a month and a half.
Amazing.
The same people, right?
Yeah.
And what was really cool was to just watch the conversation emerge, because, you know, there's a little thing called momentum.
Yes.
That when you put more time and attention, and when you obviously you trust the teacher that you're working with, and that relationship is also developing, there is a certain kind of momentum you can build into your practice, and you can step onto higher rungs, and you don't fall back down. You can have those kinds of experiences too, which are those are nice to have. So yeah, I had people for twice a day coming for lessons.
Great.
And of course, most of us in the beginning were sitting in our homes just not knowing what to think about all this. And most people are sitting with their issues, are still staring them right in the face.
Mm-hmm.
So the classes were actually a real boon for the people that came. And of course, I loved it too. I'm still doing it now. I'm starting a series for musicians next week. Well, if this posts in August, it will be later. But for the last 11 years, I've taught Feldenkrais at the Meadowmount Music Festival, which is it's probably one of the oldest and most prestigious music festivals in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they canceled it for the first time in its entire history this summer.
Wow.
So I wanted to do something for the musicians at the festival, invite them too, but obviously for musicians all around, and I'm a musician, so.
Why not?
Yeah, of course. The community really is possible under these circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it's even necessary.
Definitely. Well, that's awesome. Thank you for that overview. So obviously, if you're watching this, which you are, the links to everything will be below or somewhere near this video, or if it's an audio, it'll be near that. And I highly recommend, if you're looking for Feldenkrais classes online or in person, if you happen to be in the area where Andrew is, look him up. Check him out.
Well, I'll still be teaching online after this. I have.
Do you think you're just going to continue with it?
Well, I started last year teaching online.
Okay, great.
It's cool to suddenly meet people who can come to class, not because it's in their schedule because they live nearby, but because they can just drop in through Zoom. You know, the tiers in the course that I have is not just live classes, but there are over 250 hours of lessons now.
There's a lot, and
there's a real opportunity for both time with a live teacher, which is great, but also you can really take a deep dive into the work, you know.
And explain the tiers just quickly, how they work. I know that there's different.
It's a month. It's the course is hosted through Patreon.
Got it.
Patreon is a platform that allows you to pay a monthly subscription to get members only content from a teacher or a person providing the content. That's me.
Yep.
So you can pay at $5 a month, 10, 20, 30, and 50. Perfect. And the higher, I think at the $5, everybody is invited to the live classes for right now.
$5 a month.
Yeah.
It's great.
So you can come to class every Monday through Friday for the whole month. And then if you want access to the recordings, they're posted at the $10 level for this musician series that I'm doing. Great. And then, at the $50 level, you have access to the complete library. Yeah. So you can come to the classes. I do email communication with people, and then I have my private clients too.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot from the beginnings to I know we didn't get into your training experiences. And I don't even know if it's something that's 100% essential. Maybe we talk about your experience in training and becoming an assistant trainer at another time. It could be fun. But I just want to say, Andrew, I appreciate your dedication. It's very clear you have an affinity to this work.
I'm better at this point.
You do, and the reason we're talking, I'm picky about who I, promote and suggest and refer, and there is a reason why, to this day, when I want an FI, a Feldenkrais lesson, I wait till I'm in New York, and now that I can use you, air quotes, online, it's like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I never thought of that. So thank you so much for everything you do. I'm glad we met.
Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, back in, I think it was 2005, maybe, back in Victoria.
Back in Victoria.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Beautiful place.
Any final parting words that you would like to convey to those listening around their process and their learning? What would be inspiration or a parting thought?
The work itself is it's much deeper than you imagine, but not in the sense of it being deeper and mysterious. The work I find to be very practical approach. And what you're looking for, talk to a teacher, qualify your teacher, have a conversation with them, ask your questions, see if they can answer, they can create a situation where you feel like you're getting your questions answered. To me, that's an important quality. The teacher brings a certain consistency, of course. Mm-hmm. That's without a question. I've been doing it for 20 years. You've been teaching. I don't know how many years you've been teaching, right? The student also has to bring consistency. Mm-hmm. And this is very important. In the beginning, most students they're wanting to choose the right teacher. And of course you are. Just know that it's a relationship that you're trying to develop, and you're trying to learn, how can I use this teacher for what I want? That's a very important conversation to be able to have, and to see what goes from there. That's my final thought.
Beautiful. Thank you.